Welcome to episode 4 of The Evidence Room. Inside every investigation, the truth is hidden in the evidence. Tonight, we explore one of Germany's most disturbing unsolved crimes, the Hinterkaifeck Murders.
It really is one of those cases that just, it gets under your skin and stays there.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I want you to just imagine this for a second. You're standing on your property, and you find this set of deep footprints in the fresh snow, and they lead directly from the dark edge of the forest right up to your front door.
Right, which is already creepy enough.
Exactly. So you trace them with your eyes, right?
Yeah.
You're expecting to see where this visitor went next. But there are no tracks leading away.
None at all.
Whoever walked onto your property never left. They are still there. And if you are Andreas Gruber, the patriarch of this farm, you don't panic. You don't call for help. You just go back to work.
Which is just a profound failure of survival instinct.
Yeah, and that single decision to ignore the intruder who is already hiding on your land, that's going to cost you and 5 other people your lives.
It sets the stage for a mystery that has completely paralyzed investigators for over a century now. Because we're talking about the methodical slaughter of an entire household. 6 people, right across 3 generations, just wiped out in a single night.
Yeah.
But the most terrifying aspect of Hinterkaifeck isn't just the physical violence. It's the deeply calculated psychological warfare that happened in the days leading up to the massacre. And, well, the chilling domestic routine the killer established right after.
Right. To really understand the mechanics of this crime, we have to look at the environment. So, picture a remote farmstead in Bavaria, Germany. The year is 1922.
The setting is everything here.
It really is. The farm is located about 43 to 45 miles north of Munich, near this small town called Kaifeck. But distance alone doesn't really capture how isolated they were.
No, not at all.
The farm itself, Hinterkaifeck, is nestled right up against this incredibly dense, oppressive forest line. And the family operates with this intense fortress mentality.
Yeah, they essentially built an invisible wall around the property. They function completely independently from the nearby town.
But the problem with the fortress is, while it keeps the outside world out, it also traps you inside with whatever actually manages to breach the gates. It's like a pressure cooker.
That is a great way to put it, that physical and social isolation is the crucial variable here. I mean, in post-World War I rural Bavaria, farms like this were practically autonomous domains anyway.
Right.
And the Gruber family, they really embodied that extreme self-reliance. But when you cut yourself off from the community to that degree, you strip away your natural safety nets.
You lose the watchful eyes of your neighbor.
Exactly. Whatever happens on that land stays on that land. And because of that, the delay in anyone noticing something was wrong gave the perpetrator an unprecedented advantage.
So let's look at the victims living inside that pressure cooker. The legal owner of the farm is a 35-year-old widow named Victoria Gabriel. She lives there with her 2 kids, right? 7-year-old Cecilia and her 2-year-old son, Joseph.
Right, 3 generations under one roof.
Yeah, because also running the property are Victoria's parents. You've got Andreas Gruber, who is 64, and his wife Cecilia, who is 72. So it's a multi-generational home, but it is notoriously reclusive. They really kept to themselves.
Highly, highly insular.
So you look at this setup, and it almost seems designed to hide secrets. And I have to ask, does this extreme isolation make you the perfect, vulnerable target for some opportunistic outsider? Or does it serve as this heavy blanket to smother a really dark internal conflict brewing inside the family itself?
Well, investigators would wrestle with that exact question for decades. Because long before the murders even happened, the protective seal on Hinterkaifeck had already started to crack.
Things were getting weird.
Very weird. A creeping, palpable dread had really infected the property. 6 months prior to the murders, the previous maid abruptly quit.
She just packed up and left right.
She packed her bags and fled. And look, while it wasn't recorded in her official police statements, the local lore strongly maintained that she heard phantom footsteps in the attic, and that she felt this constant, heavy gaze watching her from the shadows.
Oh man, just the thought of that. And the thing is, she wasn't just being paranoid, because the environment itself started leaving physical clues.
Real, tangible evidence that someone was there.
Exactly. Less than a week before the murders, Andreas Gruber makes this series of discoveries that honestly should have triggered an immediate evacuation.
Oh, without a doubt.
First, he finds a Munich newspaper on the farm, a paper that absolutely no one in the family subscribed to.
Which is such a specific detail.
Right. The postman didn't drop it off by mistake, it was just there. And a Munich newspaper on a rural farm, well, that's a footprint of a different kind. It suggests someone who has ties to the city, or at least access to urban goods, has already breached their perimeter.
It is a massive anomaly in their highly controlled environment. But then comes the actual physical proof.
Of footprints.
Yeah. Andreas is out surveying the property and spots those tracks of the fresh snow we talked about, leading out from the dark tree line right up to one of the farm buildings, with 0 tracks leading away.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is the moment where logic dictates you get your family out of the house.
You'd think so.
I mean, it's like watching a horror movie where the characters just completely ignore the glaring red flags. You have a phantom newspaper, you have footprints entering the property and vanishing, and Andreas himself actually starts hearing the same footsteps in the attic that the previous maid complained about.
He even goes up there, right?
Yes, he searches the attic, finds no one, and then he just goes about his day. He never goes to the police. And because he refused to seek help, he unknowingly gave the intruder the one thing they needed. Time to watch, wait, and orchestrate the slaughter.
It's baffling to our modern sensibilities, I know. But we really have to understand the specific mindset of a 64-year-old Bavarian farmer in 1922.
Right, different era entirely.
Exactly. For Andreas, calling the authorities from a town miles away over some creaking floorboards and snow tracks, well, that would have been an unacceptable admission of vulnerability.
A pride thing.
100%. These were people whose entire identity was built on solving their own problems. And tragically, his fierce independence provided the absolute perfect cover for the killer. He chose to ignore the shadows, completely unaware that the threat was already embedded inside his home.
Which brings us to Friday, March 31st, 1922, the timeline of the massacre. The family finally hires a new maid to replace the one who fled 6 months ago.
Right, Maria.
Yeah, Maria Baumgartner, a 44-year-old woman. Her sister drops her off at Hinterkaifeck that afternoon. And that sister driving away is the last time anyone would ever see the 6 residents alive.
It's just so tragic for Maria.
Yeah.
Her first day on the job. And the forensic reconstruction of what happened later that evening, while limited by the science of the time, the mechanics of the attack are undeniably clear.
It wasn't a chaotic frenzy.
Not at all. The killer, or killers, executed a highly methodical, devastatingly patient trap.
Yeah, instead of a frantic home invasion, we see what amounts to an architectural funnel. The killer utilizes the layout of the farmstead to their advantage. It's like a spider catching prey in a web.
That's a terrifyingly accurate comparison.
They don't try to control 6 people at once inside the main house. Instead, someone lures the family members out of the living quarters and into the barn one by one.
One by one.
Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and the 7-year-old little girl, Cecilia, they walk into the barn individually, and as they cross the threshold, they are struck down.
It is a brilliant, terrifying tactical decision. By controlling a single doorway, the killer turned the family's own property into an execution line. And the weapon used was brutally intimate.
The mattock.
Yeah. The forensic reports pointed to a mattock, which is this heavy, unwieldy pickaxe used for breaking up hard soil.
And using a farming tool like that requires an immense amount of physical exertion. It's not like the detached, split-second pull of a trigger from across a room.
No, not even close.
To crush the skulls and faces of 4 separate people in succession with a heavy mattock requires incredible stamina, sheer physical power, and this intense comfort with up-close, visceral violence.
Exactly. It speaks volumes about the perpetrator's physical capability and, honestly, their emotional state. The autopsy also revealed that the older Cecilia showed signs of strangulation.
Just adding another layer of manual violence.
Right. Once the 4 family members were dead, the killer meticulously stacked their bodies in the stable and covered them with a board and hay to delay discovery.
But the most harrowing detail of this entire case, the one that just breaks my heart, belongs to the 7-year-old girl.
Little Cecilia.
Yeah. The autopsy evidence proved that young Cecilia did not die instantly from the trauma. She survived the initial attack. She lay in the hay, in the dark, next to the crushed bodies of her family for hours.
Unimaginable.
And in her agony, she had literally torn chunks of her own hair out of her scalp before finally succumbing to her injuries.
It is a horrific reality to confront. And the violence didn't even end in the barn. After securing the 4 bodies, the killer moved out of the agricultural space and directly into the domestic space.
Right, they walk through the connecting hallway from the barn straight into the living quarters. They enter the maid's bedroom where Maria has been working for mere hours on her very first day, and they bludgeon her to death in her bed.
Just brutal.
Then they move into Victoria's bedroom. locate the 2-year-old toddler, Joseph, sleeping in his crib, and strike him with the same fatal force. 6 lives, entirely erased.
The deliberate targeting of the maid and the toddler proves that this was an operation of total annihilation. No witnesses were to be left alive. But it is the killer's behavior after the final blow is struck that elevates this crime into something profoundly anomalous.
The aftermath is where the psychology gets truly bizarre. So after Friday night, a heavy silence falls over Hinterkaifeck. Saturday morning arrives, and the mailman drops off the post.
And no one comes out to collect it.
Nobody. Sunday rolls around, and the family, who are known to be deeply devout and never miss a service, they fail to show up for church. By Monday, young Cecilia is absent from school.
People are starting to talk.
Yeah, the neighbors begin to notice that the farm is dead. There is no movement. Even the family dog isn't making a sound.
The very isolation that Andres had so carefully cultivated was now working to conceal their murders.
Exactly. It wasn't until Tuesday, April 4th, so 4 full days after the massacre, that anyone decided to physically intervene. A close neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, accompanied by 2 other men, Jakob Sigel and Michael Paul, they walk over to Hinterkaifeck to investigate the silence.
And what they find is just grim.
They arrive at the property and find the doors to the main house locked from the inside. However, the entrance to the machinery room in the barn is wide open, so they step inside, moving into the stable area, and there, under the board and the pile of hay, they uncover the grisly scene: the 4 crushed bodies. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's examine the logic of what happens next, because it defies basic survival instinct. Schlittenbauer finds 4 brutally murdered bodies. He has 2 capable men with him.
Yeah.
Yet, he leaves them in the barn, walks through that dark connecting hallway completely alone, enters the pitch-black house, unlocks the front door from the inside, and then lets the other men in. That is where they find Maria and little Joseph. How does that make sense?
It is a genuinely baffling sequence of events.
I look at this and see 2 distinct psychological possibilities. Either Schlittenbauer is in such a profound state of traumatic shock that his cognitive processing has entirely collapsed, right? Making him totally oblivious to the danger that a mass murderer could still be hiding in the kitchen.
That's one option.
Or this is a calculated, deliberate sweep of the scene before witnesses are allowed inside.
Both are very compelling behavioral theories, and investigators absolutely flagged his actions. Walking into a dark, locked house containing an unknown threat is highly, highly suspicious.
Yeah, you just don't do that.
Right. But regardless of his intent, Schlittenbauer's solo walk through the house initiated the absolute destruction of the crime scene.
Destruction is an understatement. Once word got out, the surrounding rural community descended on the farmstead. We are talking about a totally contaminated environment.
It was a free-for-all.
Locals were walking through the blood, poking at the bodies, moving critical evidence. At one point, incredibly, someone actually started cooking food in the Gruber's kitchen.
I know, it sounds insane to us now. But we have to remember the limitations of the era. In 1922, forensic science, as we know it, barely existed in rural jurisdictions.
People just didn't know better.
Exactly. Principles like securing a perimeter or preventing cross-contamination, they just were not standard practice for local farmers. By the time the lead investigator, George Gruber, made the 45-mile journey from Munich, the scene had been hopelessly trampled.
The next day, Dr. Johann Baptist Müller arrived to perform the autopsies right there on the farm. He confirmed the weapon was likely a mattock or pickaxe, which, by the way, wouldn't be found until a full year later, hidden up in the attic when the house was being demolished.
Talk about a delayed discovery.
Seriously. And because of the contamination and the era's technological limits, they secured absolutely 0 fingerprints.
But despite the ruined state of the scene, the Munich investigators were able to establish a few concrete behavioral facts. Most importantly, they decisively ruled out robbery.
Right, because Andreas Gruber was known to be a wealthy man.
Yes, and investigators easily located his substantial stash of cash, sitting completely untouched in the house. The motive was not financial gain.
No, the motive was entirely different. And this leads to the most chilling revelation of the entire deep dive. The killer didn't just slaughter this family and melt back into the forest. They moved in.
They stayed.
They stayed on the farm for days after the murders. They fed the livestock. They ate the family's food from the pantry. Neighbors even reported seeing smoke casually rising from the farmhouse chimney over the weekend. What kind of psychological state allows someone to slaughter an entire family, including a toddler, and then just casually make dinner in their kitchen.
The psychological implications of that behavior are monumental.
Yeah.
I mean, feeding the cattle isn't just about feeling comfortable. It points directly to ingrained agricultural habits.
Okay, yeah.
It suggests a perpetrator who understands the rhythms of farm life.
Right. This detail completely rewrites the suspect profile. You don't stoke a fire and tend to the animals if you are a panicked, transient drifter looking for a quick score.
Not at all.
That behavior reads as someone taking absolute ownership of the space. It's an extreme form of entitlement. You eliminate the owners and suddenly you are the master of the house, living intimately alongside the corpses you just created.
That intense familiarity strongly directed investigators away from a random attack. It pushed them deeply into the interpersonal dynamics of the Gruber family. And when they started digging into the family's history, they uncovered a dark, insular reality.
The local rumors have been circulating for years, but the police finally pulled the official records. In 1914 or 1915, Andreas Gruber and his own daughter, Victoria, were convicted of incest.
A huge scandal.
Huge. They both served prison time for the offense.
And this criminal conviction instantly cast a shadow over the entire household, specifically regarding a massive paternity mystery.
Right, kids.
Yeah. Victoria had married a man named Carl Gabriel in April 1914. Shortly after the wedding, Carl was deployed to World War I and reportedly died in combat in December 1914.
Okay, keep that timeline in mind.
Right, because Victoria's daughter Celia was born in 1915, and her son Joseph was born years later in 1919. So the glaring question became, who fathered these children?
And that question brings us right back to our primary suspects, starting with Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who led the search party and walked through the dark house alone.
Suspect number one.
Exactly. Police interviews revealed that Schlittenbauer and Victoria had been intimately involved years prior. Victoria wanted to marry him. But when she became pregnant with Joseph, Schlittenbauer openly doubted he was the father, specifically because of the documented incestuous history between Victoria and Andreas.
It was a very messy situation. The conflict escalated to the point where Schlittenbauer actually filed a formal incest complaint with the police against Andreas and Victoria over the paternity of the child.
Wow.
But Victoria allegedly pleaded with him, and he eventually withdrew the complaint. He even went so far as to affectionately call young Joseph mein Buber, which means my boy.
So you look at the profile. You have a man with a documented romantic entanglement, a clear motive of jealousy or betrayal, a history of legal warfare with the family, and highly suspicious, scene-destroying behavior on the day the bodies are discovered. It seems like an open and shut case.
It certainly looks damning. But we must consider why the police ultimately cleared him after intensive interrogations.
They really grilled him.
They did. But despite his bizarre actions at the crime scene, Schlittenbauer's behavior could genuinely be interpreted as the panicked, irrational cognitive collapse of a rural farmer finding his neighbors and possibly his own son slaughtered in the hay.
I mean, trauma does weird things to people.
Exactly. Furthermore, the authorities could not definitively break his alibi or connect him to the physical execution of the crime, which forced them to look elsewhere.
Which opens the door to suspect number 2, the phantom soldier, Carl Gabriel.
This is a wild theory.
It is. Did he actually die in World War I? His body was never recovered from the battlefield. The theory proposes that Carl survived, made his way back to Bavaria, and discovered his wife's infidelity or the ongoing incestuous relationship with her father.
And snapped.
Right. Driven by vengeance, he systematically wipes out every person laying claim to the farm.
This vengeance theory actually gained significant traction decades later, following World War II. Returning Soviet prisoners claimed they had encountered a man matching Carl Gabriel's precise description wearing a Russian uniform.
That is wild.
It is, but like so much of this case, it remains unverified hearsay.
The police also chased down other leads. One witness reported walking past the Hinterkaifeck farm the day after the murders and crossing paths with a mysterious man holding a lantern. But the glare from the light was so intense it completely obscured the man's face.
Over the decades, the authorities interviewed over 100 different suspects, ranging from traveling tradesmen to local farmers.
It really is like a tangled rural soap opera that just mutated into an absolute nightmare.
It really is. But when we analyze the macro-level evidence, the extreme stamina-draining violence of the mattock, the architectural funnel of the barn trap, the specific targeting of the toddler, and the killer's chilling post-murder comfort in the house, it overwhelmingly points to an intense, deeply personal emotional conflict.
Yet, despite thousands of hours of investigation, The trail went completely cold. The limitations of 1922 forensics doomed the case from the very beginning.
They just didn't have the tools.
With no fingerprints, no DNA, and a crime scene trampled by the entire town, there was simply no physical anchor to tie any suspect to the matic. And to make matters worse, shortly after the murders, the farm itself was completely razed to the ground.
Torn down completely.
Yeah, the physical structure of Hinterkaifeck was erased, destroying whatever hidden evidence might have remained in the floorboards or the soil.
The investigation officially dragged on for decades. The police file wasn't formally closed until 1955. And the chief investigator, Conrad Miller, was so consumed by the mystery that he continued conducting rogue interrogations well into his retirement in 1986.
But the pursuit of the truth actually didn't stop in the 1980s. In 2007, students at the First and Fieldbrook Police Academy reopened the files.
This is a fascinating modern development.
It is. They applied modern investigative profiling and forensic theory to the surviving documents. And astonishingly, they actually arrived at a conclusion.
They figured it out.
They agreed on a single, highly probable theory and identified a specific culprit. But they made this fascinating institutional choice. They sealed the conclusion and kept the name a secret out of respect for the suspect's living descendants.
It really highlights the stark limitations of historical justice.
Yeah, so what does this all mean for justice? I mean, does keeping the killer's identity a secret deny the victims their closure? Or is it the only ethical choice left a century later when the perpetrator is long gone?
Well, by 2007, the perpetrator was long dead. Publishing the name wouldn't result in a courtroom trial or a prison sentence. It would only invite immense public scrutiny and misplaced retribution onto innocent relatives who had absolutely nothing to do with the crime.
I actually understand the mechanism behind that decision. The justice system is fundamentally designed to provide a fair trial. When a trial is biologically impossible because everyone involved is dead, releasing a name doesn't really serve justice. It merely weaponizes historical trauma.
Exactly.
The police academy students found their answer, but they recognized that broadcasting it would only create new victims a century later.
It leaves the public with a legacy of shadows. Today, the town goes by the name Wadehoven. The Gruber farmstead is completely gone. There is no house, no barn, no heavy tree line trapping them in.
Nothing left.
The only thing standing on that blood-soaked earth today is a simple stone memorial, where visitors quietly arrive to pay their respects to the 6 lives extinguished in the dark.
But the psychology of this unknown killer leaves us with one final, haunting realization to consider. The perpetrator fed the animals, they stoked the fire, they fell entirely at home.
They do the routine.
Which means they understood the farm, and they likely understood the community. Since they were never apprehended, I want you to think about the aftermath. Did the murderers simply walk out of that house, down the road, and back into their own life?
It's chilling to think about.
Did they live out the rest of their days right there in that tight-knit Bavarian town? Imagine the chilling reality that the killer might have regularly walked past the grieving neighbors, attended the very same church, or perhaps in their later years, even walked right past that stone memorial, holding the secret of Hinterkaifeck until their dying breath.
Thanks for listening to The Evidence Room. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Remember, some cases remain unsolved, but the evidence always tells a story.